This is an update video on my progress on King's Raid World Boss number 1. As you can see, I have recently surpassed 10 trillion in damage to World Boss number 1. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I did that. I'm using Laudia as my main DPS character. She's probably one of the best, if not the best, DPS characters for this World Boss. A lot of people like to use Kara as well, but my Kara is not as well built as Laudia. Laudia is the only character I'm using in this battle that has an A2 soul weapon. I have her at A2 E18, and I am using Galgoria gear on her. I'm using two of the additional skills are the skill that increases her damage by 3% every 15 seconds. I'm also using the skill that increases the damage she deals to enemies by 25% when her hit points is above 95%, and I'm also using a additional skill that increases her critical damage by 50%. For my tank, I'm using Jane. Jane is a character that just got a buff that gives her maybe one of the strongest magic amps in the game. Her S2 can now stack up to 5 times and becomes irremovable. And as you can see, my Jane isn't really that powerful. She has a 3-star unique treasure and a 3-star unique weapon. She also has an A0E5 soul weapon. So I wouldn't exactly call her weak, but she also has room to be built even more. But even at this build, I find her to be a lot better than Excelsia. Excelsia was the tank that I was using before, but now that Jane got a buff, Jane has boosted my damage quite a bit for World Boss number 1. I'm also using Fallen Frey. Not much needs to be said about Fallen Frey, except that she is an excellent healer to use in pretty much all 3 World Boss battles, and she's got a very powerful shield as well. I'm also using Veronica. Veronica is a very good NPC character to use in boss battles, and I also have Siegfried gear on her. Siegfried gear is very useful when you're using it on a wizard like Veronica in a supporting situation, because the Siegfried gear will enhance your best DPS character. I'm also using Pricillia. Pricillia is a character that will enhance the DPS character's attack. I believe it's either her S2 or S3 that will give 15% of her attack to the main DPS character. I actually also choose the perk that allows me to use half of her physical defense as attack. So her attack is actually higher than what it says here, because her attack is actually her attack plus half of her physical defense. Then I'm using Oddy. Oddy is well known for his ability to greatly lower cooldowns of all the characters. And I also use Siegfried gear on Oddy, and that's because Siegfried gear, when it's used with a mechanic, will provide all the characters with 500 mana every 10 seconds, and also reduce their cooldowns by 1/2 second every 10 seconds, and that does make a difference. I'm also using Rehartna, and a lot of people don't necessarily like Rehartna, but I do. I think that Rehartna is an excellent character, and I've tried using other characters in place of Rehartna. I've tried using Evan, I've tried using Shia, I've tried using Annette, and I've tried using May, and I find that none of them are quite as good as Rehartna. Maybe Annette would be better in this battle if I were to really build her and give her a lot of attack, since she can share 5% of her attack with all the other characters. But it would take a while to farm that gear to do that. Right now I'm trying to farm gear to enhance Pricillia, so that's not my top priority. One thing I really like about Rehartna is her S3 reduces cooldowns. Not as much as Oddy's S3 does, but having 2 characters that reduce cooldowns really does make a big difference. As you can see in this battle, I use her S3 light perk, which will make sure that her skill cooldown perk will apply to 6 characters rather than just 4. And that makes a big difference. I do that for all the World Boss battles, or any battle with 6 or more characters in it. I also use the pocket watch of Ancient Civilization, and I find that's quite useful for her because it will reduce her cooldowns and allow her to heal more quickly, and also for the buffs that she gives to happen more quickly, and also for her cooldown reduction to happen more quickly. Then I'm using Lavril. Lavril is the only character that I don't have Technomagic gear on. The reason for that is I want Lavril's critical damage to be as high as possible because she lends, I believe, 50% of her critical damage to the main DPS character, and it's a lot harder to get higher critical damage with Technomagic gear, since each line of Technomagic gear, at most you can have 32% critical damage, but you can only have 2 lines. With ordinary gear, you can have 4 lines of critical damage, each one being at most 24%. Plus, you can also enchant each item with a scroll and add even more critical damage. That stated, I believe if you were to get 4 pieces of Technomagic gear that all had the perk of increasing critical damage by 50%, then you would probably have more critical damage using Technomagic gear, but it would take a long time to farm for that, to get that additional skill 4 times. So let's get into the battle. So as you can see, the 4 characters that I am manualing are Veronica, Oddy, Pricillia, and Laudia. And the first time I use their soul weapons, I try to wait until he is stunned, and then I can use all their soul weapons in unison. You'll also notice I do my best, although I sort of slipped up there, to use Pricillia's S2 and then her S3. Her S3 is more powerful when you use it within, I believe, like 20 seconds of using her S2, so I try to do that as much as possible. And as you can see, I'm waiting to use the 4 soul weapons until he is stunned, which is about to happen. And then I also will try to use Laudia's S3 right after, or within 10 seconds or so of using soul weapons, because usually soul weapons will magnify the damage that the bosses, or actually the enemy, takes, even non-bosses. So, depends on the soul weapon, of course. And Laudia's S3 is the main skill that does the most damage. Also, the thing about Laudia is she has a lot of attack speed, but you don't really need to give her a lot of attack speed. And that's because her S3 will raise her attack speed by 800. So, but you don't want to use the skill. There is a skill on Technomagic gear that will limit, that will increase attack, but will limit attack speed to just 1000. And it's not a good idea to use that with Laudia, because a lot of the advantage she has is that she has very quick attack speed, and you know, she's able to do multiple attacks with her S3. For Veronica, her S2 is probably the most important, the one that enhances the DPS character the most. But her S1 and S3 I also use. Her S3 is more important when you're using a magic DPS character, as I am now, because it specifically enhances magic damage. I do try, at least, to save Laudia's soul weapon for when he is stunned, although I don't always do that, especially if he still has a long way to go based on his CC bar before he is stunned. Of all these 4 soul weapons, the one that recharges the fastest is Pricillia. I also, one of the perks I'm using on her Technomagic gear gives her 1 extra soul weapon usage, which is useful, especially since Pricillia's soul weapon recharges relatively quickly. Oddy's soul weapon, on the other hand, is relatively slow. For that reason, I usually end up not using Oddy's soul weapon every single time that I could, although right now, I'm actually doing pretty well in that area. I've used it where he's only got 4 times left. Rehartna's cooldown reduction is actually quite useful, and you'll notice just then, Laudia's cooldown went from 4 seconds to 0 seconds, and that was because of Rehartna. It's especially useful since Oddy's S3 has a pretty long cooldown itself, and it's nice to get the additional cooldowns from Rehartna while you're waiting for Oddy's cooldown to be usable. And with about 2 minutes and 14 seconds left, we reached the 5 trillion damage mark, and damage does increase in the latter half, and that's because it takes 3 minutes for the perk that increases the damage that Laudia does by 3% every 15 seconds to max out. I have that perk 2 times on Laudia's Technomagic gear, so it's a good sign that I was able to make it to 5 trillion that quickly. In fact, quite a lot of the damage, I think about 3 trillion, will occur in the last minute, or maybe just a little bit longer. This boss's attacks do get stronger and stronger as the battle goes on. However, we have done a pretty good job of surviving so far. So we're well past 6 trillion in damage right now, and he is getting ready to do his really powerful attack, which gets stronger and stronger every time. But it looks like we'll be able to survive it, and there we did. We survived it pretty well once again. So around the 104 minute mark, we will end up getting to 7 trillion, and this time overall I've done a pretty good job of timing my soul weapons and also being able to use my soul weapons as much as possible, since I can now have one more usage of 3 of the 4 of them. Rehartna's soul weapon is also very powerful, especially when you have a physical DPS character. I'm using a magical DPS character here, but it's still pretty powerful even then. And that is really helping me out here too, although she's on auto. So I'm going to reach the 9 trillion damage mark at about 18 seconds, meaning I did about 2 trillion in damage in just 46 seconds. So it does speed up in the last minute. And with around 20 seconds to go, he does end up killing Veronica, but that's the only one he kills. And I'm still able to do over 10 trillion in damage, which ends up being a personal record for me. As you can see, I am about to surpass 10 trillion right at the 3-second mark. So there we go, 10 trillion in damage. And we used all of Oddy's soul weapon except for 1 time. So that's pretty good. And for some reason, it takes a little bit longer for my final score to show up than it normally does, but just give it a second. You can see the score at the top at least. I did end up finishing in the top 3,000 worldwide and in the top 300 in the North American server. So there's my score. It popped up over 10 trillion in damage. Special thanks to my Patreon associate producer, Jamie Joy. If you like this video, give it a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel, click the bell icon for notifications, and select all notifications. It really helps me out when you select all notifications. You can also catch me on Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter at ZorkBid123.